Scholars, welcome back to the Middle Ages, Knights, Castles, and Chivalry. Today we'll be going over Chapter 5, The Power of the Church. So I remember when we were looking at the different class levels during medieval times, the church was one group of people who had more power than some of the serfs and other people who worked for a living. Here is our new vocabulary list. So remember, we're going to have some paper to write down each of these words and their definition, and then the part of speech. So when I see that abbreviated V period, that means verb, an action word. When I see ADJ period, that means an adjective that describes a noun. And then N period is a noun, a person, place, or thing or idea. So we're going to start off with number 1, which is summon, S-U-M-M-O-N. Summon means to call or send for someone. So if mom summons you to come eat dinner, she's asking, calling for you to come and get your food. So that makes it a verb, an action word. Our next word is anchored, A-N-C-H-O-R-E-D. An anchor, I know, is something on a ship, like a boat, that goes down into the water and then hooks onto something in the ground to keep that boat from moving. But anchored is an adjective, and it's describing something that's strongly connected. So that could be literally if the ship is anchored, or it could be metaphorically, it's strongly connected together. So if you are anchored to your family, you have a strong connection to them. Next word that we're going to look at is fast, F-A-S-T. Now this is a multiple meaning word you may not have heard before. When someone is fasting, that's a verb, an action. This means to eat little or no food. I know that some of my friends who their religion is Islam, they're getting ready to fast during the daylight hours for Ramadan. So they will eat little or no food during the day, and then at nighttime they break their fast. They can eat. The next word is rose window. It's actually 2 words. Rose window. I know what a window is. A rose window is also a thing. It's a noun, and it's a circular stained glass window in a church that contains a pattern near the center. And a lot of times that pattern did look like a rose. We'll learn more about that in this chapter. Remember, if you get a little bit behind, just pause the video and catch up on your writing. And then you can unpause the video when you're ready to go. The next word is spire, S-P-I-R-E. That E makes the long I. Say its name, make it a long I sound. A spire is a thing, it's a noun, and it is a tall cone-shaped structure at the top of a building. So in a little bit when we see a picture, I'll show you guys what that looks like. A tall cone-shaped structure, kind of like an upside down ice cream cone shape, a cone at the top of the building. All right, I'm running out of space. I'm going to turn to the next page. And our 6th word is devote. D-E-V-O-T-E. Devote is a verb. It's an action that means to give time or attention to something. You guys are devoting a few hours each day to keep up your learning at home. And if you have already devoted, we add that ed suffix to make it past tense. All right, word 7 is exquisite. That's a fun word to say. E-X-Q-U-I-S-I-T-E. Even though there's an E on the end of that word, that's a short I sound at the end. Exquisite. And exquisite is a describing word, an adjective that means extremely beautiful. So if someone cooks you something, you could say, look at this exquisite meal that you've prepared, to give them a compliment. All right, number 8 is destined, which is a describing word. Destined means certain to become something or do something. I know that each of you is destined for greatness in your life. And 2 more words. Number 9 is humble, H-U-M-B-L-E. Humble is a describing adjective that means not thinking you are better than others. So you can feel proud of yourself, but still be humble if you make a good grade on a test and not brag and say that you're better than someone else if you are humble. And the last word is sacred, S-A-C-R-E-D. Sacred is an adjective meaning holy or deserving of special respect. All right. So now that we have our vocabulary, you can pause the video if you need to catch up on your glossary, writing down the words, and I'm going to get our story ready for us. Our big questions, our purpose for reading today is to find out how the Christian church affected the everyday lives of people in the Middle Ages. Remember, we're focused on the continent of Europe. And what practices in the Middle Ages show the influence and power of the church? Remember, influence is your ability to change someone's mind or your ability to make someone do something if you influence someone. We're looking at the influence and power of the church and what practices, what things were done to show that. All right. Here we go, the power of the church, chapter 5. It is 6 a.m. The church bells are ringing to welcome the day and to summon you to church. The early morning sunlight illuminates the stained glass windows. Sometimes at daybreak, you attend a church service before starting work. You pray often and your life is anchored to the church. Remember, that means closely connected. And here this shows a stained glass windows in La Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, France, built in the 1200s. That's a long time ago, about 1800 years ago. And here I see a round stained glass window. I wonder if that is a rose window like we saw in our vocabulary. It may be impossible for us to understand just how important the Christian church was to most Europeans in the Middle Ages. Not only did the local lords have great influence over people's lives, but the church did too. The power of the church had grown gradually over a long period of time. Remember, gradually means little by little. So little by little, their power had grown. Christianity is based on the teachings of a man named Jesus, who lived hundreds of years before the Middle Ages began. Jesus' followers were known as Christians. In the first 300 years after Jesus' life, Christianity grew slowly. In fact, in the early years of the ancient Roman civilization, Romans were not permitted to practice their Christian faith. That means they're not allowed, they're not permitted. Later, Christianity was tolerated as one religion among several. Eventually, it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Christianity spread throughout the empire. As it spread, the power and influence of the church in Rome grew. The Pope was the leader of the Western Church. Here I see under the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, Christianity was accepted as one of several religions in the Roman Empire, meaning that there were other religions that were practiced as well. As time went on during the Middle Ages, conflicts developed between the Eastern followers of the church who spoke Greek and the Western followers who spoke Latin. Finally, in 1054 CE, the two sides split over differing beliefs. The Eastern Church was called Orthodox. Members of the Orthodox Church thought their beliefs were orthodox or correct. The Western Church, based in Rome, was called Catholic. Members of the Catholic Church thought their beliefs were Catholic or universal. So that's where those names came from. The two Christian churches that emerged during the Middle Ages still exist today. In Western Europe, almost every village and town had a church. Most people attended church on Sunday. In addition, certain days were considered holy days to mark important events in the life of Jesus and his followers. People did not work on these days, but instead went to church. Some holy days were feast days and other holy days of fasting. Christmas, an important Christian holiday, was a time of feasting or celebration. The 40 days before Easter, another Christian holiday, were a time of fasting called Lent. So some people choose to not eat meat to follow Lent during the week. During those 40 days before Easter, they fast. Architects and craftsmen in the Middle Ages built beautiful churches to express their love for God. New engineering skills enabled stonemasons to create a style of architecture that later became known as Gothic. They built tall towers, arches, rose windows, and spires. Sometimes it took hundreds of years to complete a great medieval cathedral. So here's the Chartres Cathedral, and I see here there's a rose window, and then these are the spires. So they're shaped like cones up on top of these tall towers. It would take hundreds of years. They didn't have any kind of machinery to help them. They had to build it by hand. Holy shrines dedicated to people who played an important role in the history of Christianity were scattered across Western Europe. These shrines were usually places where religious figures had been killed or buried, or where miracles were believed to have happened. Most Christians hoped to go on one last journey, or pilgrimage, to visit one of these shrines in their lifetime. For many, going on a pilgrimage meant walking or riding long distances and eating and sleeping in roadside taverns or religious houses. Many men and women made the journey to fulfill a vow to God, to seek a cure for a disease, or just to travel abroad. Monks were men who chose to live apart from society and to devote their lives to the church. They spent their lives in monasteries, working on the land, studying, and praying. Monks were often the most educated people in Europe, especially in the early part of the Middle Ages. A monastery was a building or collection of buildings that housed monks. Monasteries were usually contained within high walls that provided a certain amount of protection. And this is the Senec Abbey in Provence, France, founded in 1148 CE. So a monk is kind of like a nun, but a monk is a man and a nun is a woman. They are people who are leaders in the church. Women also joined the church. Women who devoted their lives to the church were called nuns. Nuns lived in convents or nunneries. Nuns received many of the same benefits as monks. They were educated and were taught crafts and other skills. As the church grew in power and influence, it became very wealthy. The church raised taxes and owned land. People who held powerful positions within the church often came from wealthy noble families. They gave large amounts of money to the church. The church also influenced political decisions and supported or opposed kings. Not only powerful people gave money to the church. All Christians were required to pay 1/10 of their earnings to the church. This payment was known as a tithe. So if you made $100, you would have to give 10 of those dollars, 1/10 of your money, to the church, or your tithe. However, there was a troubling side to this deeply religious period in history. Some people expressed ideas with which the Pope and other church leaders disagreed. Church leaders called these contradictory opinions heresy, and the people who held them were called heretics. Heretics were treated cruelly. So here we see a painting from the 1400s, shows nuns kneeling in prayer, And then here, the interior of the Duomo or Cathedral of Pisa, Italy, begun in the 1000s. So we're in the year 2020. That was 1020 years ago. This is our subheading, says precious books. During the Middle Ages, monks and nuns studied the writing of ancient Greeks and Romans. Their libraries contained books about religion, science, poetry, mathematics, and history. Monks and nuns also copied ancient writings by hand. There were no machines or printers that made books. Can you imagine? Every single word in their book had to be written by hand. There was no copier to make those. By copying these texts, monks and nuns helped to preserve or save ancient knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. In the late Middle Ages, the higher social classes who could read and even write owned their own prayer books, such as the Book of Hours. These prayer books were read at different times of the day. In addition to prayers, the book also included biblical texts, calendars, hymns, and painted pictures. So hymns are songs, painted pictures, calendars, and then texts, little excerpts from the Bible. Many of the books produced by monks and nuns contained exquisite art and design features. After the Middle Ages, as a result of Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press around 1450 CE, more affordable books were produced. These printed books began to replace the beautiful handmade books and made these original manuscripts even more rare. Here's a page from the Book of Hours, created in the early 1400s for John, Duke of Berry in France. And then here we see in illuminated manuscripts were works of art. So they would often start off the pages. This is an R, but they've decorated it exquisitely to give lots of little details too. So the reason that not very many people were learning to read is because each of these books would take maybe a year to write out. It would be very expensive and there weren't very many. But once the printing press was created, books were, they were able to make more very quickly, and that allowed them to cost less money. Cost less money. If you were a monk, young boys like you are often given a monastery. Even a serf can become a monk. Therefore, if you are not destined to become a craftsman or a merchant, then becoming a monk is a good option. Life within a monastery certainly is hard. However, you are assured of a place to sleep, clothing, food, medical care, and education. Your training will take many years. When you start your training, you are called a novice, another word for beginner. Oh, just like those craftsmen we learned about. You begin by learning to read and write. You study texts from the Bible, pray, and learn to farm or acquire a certain skill. If, at the end of your training, you are certain you want to join the church, you take part in a special ceremony. In this ceremony, you vow or promise to dedicate your life to God. You also vow not to marry and to live a humble and obedient life. Then the top of your head is shaved, identifying you as a monk. Here's a novice taking his vows, so he's ready to join the church. As a monk, you spend a large part of your day in worship and prayer. However, you also spend time working on the land or in the monastery itself. You might wash clothes, cook, or tend to the vegetable garden. You might learn to make wine, honey, or beer. Or you might learn how to make shoes or furniture. If you have a beautiful singing voice, you might participate in the performances of Gregorian chants. Gregorian chants are a form of sacred vocal music or musical speech based on hymns or passages from the Bible. Monks perform these chants on certain holy days. As a gifted artist, you might work in the scriptorium, copying the works of classical writers or producing new books. For many like you, the life of a monk provides a degree of security and protection from some of the challenges of medieval life. So here's a monk working in the scriptorium. He's writing a script. That manuscript is why it's called a scriptorium, the place where the books are written. And here are monks chanting hymns. And you can see in both of these pictures, like they said here, your hair is shaved off the top of your head only to show other people that you are a monk. And here's the monk's prayer schedule daily. So let's see, it starts off with I guess we start right here, the prime at 6 a.m. the Tierce at 9 a.m., the Sext at 12 p.m., the Nonus at 3 p.m., Vespers at 5, Compline at 6, and this Matenza says is 2 a.m., so they might wake up to do their special prayers during the night. All right, and we have some more medieval musings. It says, what did monks and nuns write with? Clue, this writing tool was once attached to a creature that can fly. And then number 2, certain religious people provided serfs with medical care. Who do you think those people were? And here we see John Duns Scotus, a member of the church. And he's writing with something. I wonder if that's our answer to number 1. These are just for you to research on your own. And here's our letter quest for this chapter. We're finding the letter in the stained glass window, and we'll add it to where we've been writing the letters we found in other chapters. All right, next we're going to start reading about a battle that changed history. You can pause and go back to any of the text as you're working on your questions if you need some help with those to use as a resource. And I will see you for our next chapter.